same thing to you.
All right. Well, we are back. Thank you so much for being here at the Sync Up Conference. And unfortunately, the moderator of our next panel, Sean O'Connell, was not able to make it to town. He was flying in yesterday, and his flight was canceled because of the incredible storms that I'm sure you're aware of that were completely racking the East Coast. And I'm not usually one to do this kind of thing, but it was such an enormous storm, and there was such a great loss of life that, if you don't mind, I'd just like to ask for a quick moment of silence in recognition of the more than 300 people who were killed in the tornadoes across 6 southern states. Thank you. So as I said, Sean O'Connell from Music Allies and Creative Allies was not able to be here today, so I'm going to pinch hit for him. And I feel pretty okay about that because he and I kind of crafted the idea for this panel together. So I'll do the best I can. But I want to thank each of our panelists for being here today. This is very important for me, so thank you. We have Kristin Hersh, who, as you know, is an incredible musician. Started the band Throwing Muses in 1980-something. And has had an extraordinary career and has been a real innovator in ways that we're going to talk about in a minute. George Howard, who, as many of you know, is formerly the president of Rykodisc Records and was a co-founder of this company called TuneCore that I'm sure you're all aware of, and is currently on the faculty of Loyola Business School, and we're very glad to have him here. George, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Peter Himberger, who many of you know as the manager of Dr. John, and also of Gypsy Kings and John Cleary, and who else are you managing these days?
A band called Clem Snide.
Awesome.
Oh, I know Clem's nice.
Yeah.
Eve.
And is also a music supervisor and film producer, and is extraordinarily active in many different aspects of the music business. So thank you, all of you, for being here. Appreciate it. So the topic of today's panel is success in the music business with or without selling records. So that really is the question. Is it possible to be a success without the proverbial record deal? I was reading online earlier today, and I saw a statistic that, according to some study, they didn't say the source, but there was a survey, apparently, done of musicians, and it said 75% of active musicians are still in search of that proverbial major label record deal. So there remains this desire to get the big deal, to get signed. But we've all heard many stories of how being signed to a label can be a horror show. But obviously, there are pros and cons in every direction. Mystical, I don't know if everybody was in the room when he said it, but he said about being now in the music business, he said, it's designed for you to win if you play your cards right. You don't need a record label no more, he said. So
can I just say, Scott, that I'm sure that I speak for my other panelists here when there was something on our rider that we would never follow anyone from a hip-hop artist and/or anyone with only one name. So I'm not sure how this happened exactly, but you never follow kids, rappers, or anyone, animals. Or anyone, owls?
Animals.
Did you check the catering in your dressing room? We did remove all the green M&Ms for you. So, let's just start broadly. I have a couple of specifics that I'd like to ask about as well, but could we just start broadly, generally speaking? In this day and age, is it possible to have a thriving career as a musician without signing a record deal? Kristen, you look like you want to say something.
I think you have to redefine thriving career.
Okay.
I think it was inappropriately defined to begin with. When I started Throwing Muses, we were 14 years old, and we already knew that we didn't suck enough to participate in the industry.
We are not bad enough to do this.
And maybe it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it did actually turn out to be true, that we were asked to dumb down our product. We were asked to bimbo up ourselves. We were asked to play the game so hard that I eventually left Warner Brothers. I extricated myself from all of my record deals. In fact, I gave them my solo record in exchange for my freedom. and decided that I needed to turn to the listeners, and not the fans, because that's what Warner Brothers had gotten me, fans who show up when you're show of the week, who buy your record when you're album of the month, but they're not there the next time around. And ultimately that meant that I started that nonprofit CASH, the Coalition of Artists and Stakeholders, which allows musicians to reach listeners without the middleman, which is usually a record company. I'm not anti-record company, but it's the record company that you have to convince radio, to convince MTV, et cetera, that you can all fool the kids together and make them into fans, which is not sustainable. It's not an artful approach, and those people go away. Those fans are not real listeners.
Now, you've written about this topic and about developing what you call a sustainable career and sustainability in music, and you talk about something called grassroots capitalism. Can you explain that concept a little bit?
I wrote an essay about 4 years ago.
So things have changed a little bit since then.
Yeah, and yet I actually read it this morning. You can Google thoughts on sustainability. It's like the
Or you can find it at the Sync Up website. It's syncupconference.com.
I meant to say that. My favorite website, the Sync Up one. But they're valid because they're timeless concerns. And I believe these concerns have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. The advent of the music industry is a particularly shallow moment in the history of art, so it's a good canary in the coal mine. But it's difficult to create art and spread it around without trying to reach out to the lowest common denominator, which is not something I necessarily believe in anyway. I'm not sure anybody's that dumb.
So it's grassroots in the sense of connecting directly with fans, but you also make a point of calling it capitalism as opposed to giving it away, which, as we have all heard, people don't want to pay for music anymore, but you're suggesting that may not be true.
I give music away, and I have for a long time, but I also give high-quality music away, and at my special studio rate, it costs me $1 a minute to make that music, and I'm supporting other musicians and recording engineers, and so I'm open, I'm above board about that when it comes to the listeners to whom I go for support. I'm like an NPR station or community-supported agriculture. They pay my recording costs, and they receive music for nothing, which is a nice circle of gratitude. They thank me, and I thank them. And I suppose ultimately it is capitalism, which, I'm cool with as long as I don't have to suck.
Before we bring in our other panelists, there's something that I've wanted to ask you about for a long time. I became aware of something that you pioneered in the late 90s, which is, speaking of selling music as opposed to giving it away, you pioneered an internet-based song subscription model. You were the first person, certainly I had ever heard of, doing that kind of thing. This was back in the mid to late 90s when, if anybody had email access at all, it was on a dial-up, and we still really hadn't seen the proliferation of high speed or wireless or any of that kind of stuff. And yet, you developed this as a model. Could you just tell us briefly about where you got that idea and how you were able to implement it so effectively?
I had always suspected that there was an untapped audience of intelligent music listeners who were not going to traditional outlets for their information. And I would say to Warner Brothers, well, they would say, we've sold this many records. I'd say, well, to whom? And they thought I was trying to be exclusive. It wasn't my point. My point was that these people are not going to be here for the next record. And the only time I met them was when we did in-stores, meaning the band, signs records, plays in a record store. When we toured, we would be on a tour bus, in a dressing room, on stage, in a dressing room, back to the tour bus. And the only time we met the people we were playing for was when they were psychotic enough to jump up on the bus, and they would freak us out and made us feel like we didn't want to know the public. But when we played record stores, there were intelligent people who could discuss music intelligently. And those are the people I wanted to find. And I assumed I needed to go to the faceless internet to find them. And I was free to use works in progress material to reach those people. No record company could come after me for doing that. And so it was an experiment in reaching people that were not being reached by radio, MTV, Music Press, etc.
But you had a lot of people sign up for that little service and
Yeah.
paying a fee. So it was give me your money and I'll give you access to, what was it, a song a month or something like that?
I think so, something like that. It was a little misguided because they were works in progress, which is, unfinished material, and I wanted to raise the stakes a little bit, the way I did with Cash. But yeah, it was a successful experiment, and it meant that I learned that people are willing to part with money if they know where it's going. They don't want it to go into the pockets of record executives. They'll buy 10 CDs that they already own at your show if they know it's for gas money. And I respect that.
Wow. Well, Peter, I was going to ask you a question, but since Kristen just brought up the record company executives, I'm going to ask George to jump in. As a former record company executive, while you were head of a label, you were known for doing some innovative things and also having a real above-board approach to dealing with artists. And you have also, later in your career, have pioneered some tools to help make...
Is the question, how am I so awesome?
Yes, that's basically what I'm trying to ask.
I was going to ask that.
Well, can you just talk a little bit about your view of the evolution of how an artist can approach the commercial world, starting with having sold records as a label head and now in the later, in the current scheme of things?
Ooh.
Or just talk about how you're so awesome.
that would be a very short answer. Well, I think I may answer a question that wasn't asked. I think that one thing I just sort of like to say, and maybe it'll wind back around, but you can't do it on the internet, right? And I think that's the sort of great fallacy of this era right now, is that with the appropriate Twitter account and Facebook account and blog and what have you, that's all you need. And God help us, Rebecca Black aside, she's the sort of exception that proves the rule. And so I think the path is still the same, post-internet, pre-internet, or whatever, which is, as Kristen was saying, sort of being able to make those connections offline with people. And I think running the label, I never signed anyone unless I could go out and see them play live in various markets, by the way, and see that they could actually communicate. The great thing about the internet, of course, is that it amplifies your offline experiences, but you have to get that really, really, drilled into your brain. The internet amplifies offline experiences. You can't create it online. To your point, Scott, earlier about, I don't know if you were quoting Mystical or whomever, but this idea that the record, that 70-some% or whatever, people still want to get signed to a label. They know that, and we know that, or I knew that, or whatever, and it creates an asymmetry with respect to being able to sort of negotiate. When you're running a label and you realize that you're not so much negotiating in terms of, well, let's make a fair and equitable, transparent deal, but rather let me as the record label prey upon your need for validation, you'll sign anything. And I've seen it, I mean, here is a deal that strips you of all your rights. Here's a deal that requires a 360 sort of negotiation, 360 opt-in, where you're giving up not only the rights to your master recordings, but also to your touring income, publishing, and other things. Those are usurious deals. Those are right this side of I would say, being unconscionable, and yet artists willingly sign on to them. And it's not because this is a fair and equitable deal. It's because it represents some sort of validation, and that sort of asymmetry of negotiating powers is really, really bad. And yeah, I mean, I appreciate the kind words you said. We did at Ryko certainly try not to do that, but it was a very logical progression to TuneCore, where I just flipped the tables. And having played both sides, I can say, I just wrote an article yesterday, about controlled composition clauses, about the lack of a performance royalty for terrestrial broadcast for master holders. There's all sorts of things that aren't quite right. So I'll shut up, but it really should be just Kristen sort of, and I'm sure Peter too, just sort of talking. I mean, these guys, it's a matter of doing it. And I guess the long, winding answer is, don't be distracted by labels. Figure out what your objectives are. Figure out what you're trying to do in order to cultivate that offline experience, amplify it online. And when the labels come in, and if you're doing just what I said right, they will come. They still exist, and they will come after you. But oftentimes they represent a distraction, and you have to sort of understand the balances are tilted in their favor because they're preying on emotions and preying on other things that really don't add a lot of value to what you're doing. Does that make any sense?
That's one sec, Peter. Thank you. Just to amplify your point about having real life experiences in person, as opposed to assuming that you can have these same types of relationships or success strictly on the internet.
Well, you can't. Kristen's, I mean, she's too humble to say it, but it's Strange Angels, and you go to KristinHersh.com. Yeah? Or Strange, yeah, and you can see what this is about, and you can become what she and her brilliant husband manager, Billy O'Connell, have created, which is this Strange Angels sort of model where you can go and subscribe and you can gain the access. But again, Kristen, I'm talking like you're not here. You tour, you go out, you play, you do house parties, you get in front of people. You don't sit behind your computer with your Pro Tools rigged and say, "Hey, here's my fucking Teenage Symphony to God, everybody. What else do I need to do?" Right? Because you know what? Everybody thinks they wrote a Teenage Symphony to God. Every one of you did, right? You know who did? Brian fucking Wilson. And maybe
and he'll sue your ass.
He'll sue you.
Well, not unlike events like this, actually, because we are streaming live on the internet.
Oh, no, this is the right thing to do.
But you got to be here to really get it. I think it's great that we're streaming it live, but what you were saying just kind of reminded me of this particular situation.
Absolutely. I think the industry has created a generation that is unfamiliar with the passion that can happen between people in a room, and that's why ticket sales have fallen along with record sales.
And you were talking earlier about particularly intelligent audiences, not unlike the one that we have here.
Right, this perfect audience of intelligent listeners, hand-picked.
Peter, you look like you've been wanting to say something.
I just agree with George, really, in what he said. With the artists I work with, I mean, the Gypsy Kings, they many years ago sold lots of records by, some strange luck that hit. It was a good song. It really went well. But after that, they had very little hits, and they went out and decided to just tour and go in front of people and actually do it. And then things came around, record sales, everything, their profile. Movie companies came. Sooner or later, if you go out there and you do it, and you do it the way you want to do it, these record companies would come around and offer you much better deals under much better terms and under your own guidance, the way you want to do it. You have to go out and do it. You have to establish that. So,
Peter, when you and I were talking on the phone a couple of weeks ago about this panel and this topic, you said, "Oh man, I got this one," because we have worked for so many years without selling records. Now, obviously, you manage one artist, Dr. John, who has won, 57 Grammy Awards, I think? And or however many it actually is. But so obviously, he is able to sell records, get recognition for records, but that's not all it takes for him to build up his career. And some of your other artists haven't had anywhere near that level of success in terms of selling records. So from a management perspective, what are some of the tools in your grab bag that you need to use to develop that profile? I mean, we're talking about some of them in the big picture, but a little bit more specifically.
well, what we've done, you just can never tell. You come up, someone, an artist comes up, he has a project, they record it. It sounds great. You just never really know how it's gonna. I've seen the best records get shelved and never seen the light of day, and I've seen the worst records actually sell millions of records. So it's always a crapshoot. But what we always wanted to do was go out and establish what we did, and we did it through touring. We did it through licensing deals in movies. Cassandra Wilson's an artist I worked with for 8 years, and she was worked, primarily in the jazz world, and we went out and we established her in small clubs where she was worth a hard ticket, and then we brought her along, and she was in 3 or 4 movies in a row where she had really high profile, and it really helped establish who she became, and then she started selling records right after that. So you just kind of go out and do whatever it takes. You look at like somebody like Perry Farrell, who went out. He is Jane's Addiction and did that stuff, but he went out and did Lollapalooza, and that created a whole nother kind of vein for him to operate in. And that's what artists should do. They should try and go out and go after all different areas that they can kind of, make a difference in. And sooner or later, it all comes around in a circular kind of fashion. You start.
It's a tough call, though, because a lot of real musicians are not particularly ambitious. They're so obsessed with the music that they're almost necessarily dorks. They're not the show-offs we're used to associating with success in the music business, and so it has to be someone else's impetus that moves them into other spheres. But they are willing to work. Musicians always want to play, whether it's in a studio or live, and so you can be the guy that tells them, this is what we're going to do.
And there's lots of different people that can be those kind of people. It's not only their managers, but listen, I've worked with some really great record company people as well who really cared and wanted to push things along and really were helpful.
And then they're doing their job. There was always this great music business that was a sub-music business.
Yeah.
It wasn't the big, fat, bloated, crappy one.
Yeah.
There were great managers, great record companies, great radio stations, great record stores, and unfortunately, that's what we lost first in the collapse, which is ultimately a good collapse, but boy, we lost some good people.
Absolutely.
There used to be a magazine called Musician magazine, that I used to love. And I have a very vivid memory being in college in the mid-'80s, reading a copy of that magazine on the campus where I went to school. And there was a cover story on this new thing that nobody had ever heard of called the internet. And it said, very soon, labels are going to become completely obsolete. Nobody's going to need them. Nobody's going to care because artists can go direct to their fans, sell directly, and everybody's going to be their own label, and they'll all be able to live happily ever after and have terrific careers. I'm still waiting. It seems like we're closer. You've already established that there's a certain viability there. George, you're saying that you can't just do it on the internet. It can't just happen. So how close are we? I'm just going to kind of go back to the original premise. How close are we to a point where an artist can completely ignore the whole concept of signing a deal, quote unquote, and still be able to support themselves?
Well, we're there. I mean, there are artists that do it. Zoe Keating. We've all heard the sort of typical examples. Kristen. I mean, that's not. With respect, that's not really the issue. I mean, when musician, and I happen to know the publisher because he was my boss at one point. He was a jackass. But the economics have changed so radically, and we're about to see another unbelievable radical shift in the economics of the music business, and everybody's sort of wandering around like it's not going to happen. But it goes to your point about different revenue models. I mean, we've gotten unduly accustomed to this idea of making somewhere between $7 and $10 per album sold, and that's going to go away, guys. I don't know if it'll go away this month or this year or whatever, but we're going to a streaming mechanism, and so the margins that both labels and individual artists have is about to go poof. And as I'm sure this educated audience knows, your royalties on a stream, whether it's from Spotify or eMusic or Pandora or whatever, are several orders of magnitude below your 70 cents that you get from a sale from iTunes. So your question is, when are we going to reach that point of sustainability? We'll reach that point of sustainability when we stop thinking of it as the music business and instead think of it as business that involves music. And we keep trying to cram it into these old methodologies that maybe made some sense in the 80s and 90s when musician was going, but no longer make any sense. And as Kristen says, it is this sort of bifurcated approach where the artists need and must be able to sort of create, because there are bigger things in this world. I mean, I'm sitting in this room, I don't really get these paintings, but I'm awful glad they're here, and I'm sure they're epic, and I'm flaunting my ignorance. But you know, but it's really, really important to have this creation. But you need a Sherpa, you need a guide, you need somebody like Peter that can help you navigate. But I would caution you to stop trying to navigate amongst and along these parameters that have existed since the inception of the record business, because they no longer apply. And we always fall back on touring and merch and all those things and licensing, and you know, maybe, but what it's inevitably going to come back to is what I said before, and what Kristen has echoed, is if you can make connections with those freaks, with those crazy people, because those are your most vocal fans, and those are ones where you can establish a sort of reciprocal relationship where they value your art and you value their money. But it won't be the way that it is now. It just won't. And you need to get very, very educated about the changing economics and the streams and stuff, because it's not a pretty picture.
I noticed 5 years ago that I was still working constantly in the studio and on the road, and it was backwards in high heels. I had 4 kids that I dragged around the country, the world with me, and suddenly I was losing money. I had never wanted to get rich. I wanted to continue, but it was costing money to be either on the road or in the studio, so my job essentially ceased to exist if I hadn't begun to solve those problems at that juncture. So it's hard. The revolution isn't over yet. I like that music is free and in the ether, and a musical education is available to everyone, that there are no longer people who say, I listen to metal and only metal forever. Now we know that music sucks in all genres, music is great in all genres, because really that was like saying, I like redheads and only redheads, I talk to all redheads and only redheads. Now we are educated musically, but the revolution hasn't been won yet. We have to know that we can continue to make music and share it.
Well, we have this false sense of who we're fighting against. I guess that's what I was trying to say. I mean, the revolution implies that there's some enemy that we're trying to overthrow.
Well, there was a pretty good enemy.
Who? Is it the major?
Well,
The corporate involvement that sold musical success as lots of money from dumbed-down product.
Totally. And their influence was massively overstated. And American Idol and things like that continue to prop up this institution that really needs to crumble before a new one can emerge. However, their net impact on the vast majority of people that are making music is de minimis at best. I mean, it just doesn't even exist.
That's
That's what I'm saying. It's like focusing on this sort of vapor monolith out there and saying, I need to direct my career trajectory in order to do that. It's not there. It doesn't exist. And I'm trying to get people to recalibrate and say, no, I'm going to make my music on these terms. I'm going to take a bottoms-up approach. It's going to cost me $5,000 to make my record, $5,000 to market my record. I now need to make $10,000 by hook or by crook by doing whatever I need to do in order to make another one. And nowhere in that scenario, I mean, you could say that same thing about selling water or Bloody Marys or iPhone. You know, nothing about that has to do with music. It's just about saying, this is what I do, this is what I make, this is the amount of money that I need to make in order to do it again. And where does a major label or any label fit into that? It's like comparing apples and orangutans.
It's more like a shift back in time. The music industry isn't even that old. We just got used to the idea that people could make money from music. But music is a spontaneous human venture that will always continue to exist. It's always been in garages and bars and attics, and it always will be. It's just that we got used to making money from it.
Well, you say that there isn't necessarily an adversary. However, George, your business partner, Jeff Price, with TuneCore, recently got some good press by taking a fairly adversarial approach. I believe his quote to all the record labels and other industry gatekeepers of music was, "Go fuck yourselves." So, can you kind of explain what his comments were referring to?
But what he's trying, I don't want to speak for Jeff, but what I believe he's trying to say there is not dissimilar to what I'm trying to say. that by these gatekeepers, and he's talking about people that say that there are too many people, and they've said this, people like Tommy Silverman have come out and said this on record. The reason the music industry is in the place that it is because that there are too many people creating music, right? And if we had less people that were gumming up the works, then fucking geniuses like Don Henley or whatever could keep doing their thing.
See, that's the problem, because if you're selling toothpaste, you want to sell toothpaste that fights cavities. But they're selling music, and they're selling sugary toothpaste that makes your teeth rot. The difference is in quality, not quantity.
Well, look, yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, I mean, toothpaste. But if you need an enemy, if you need that to sort of say, okay, here's, and so all Jeff's trying to say is that if you distract yourself by trying to play in that system, you're going to lose what they call in economics opportunity cost that you could be using otherwise to develop your own career on your own terms. I think that's what you're saying. Hopefully at a qualitative level that is, no offense to Don Henley, whatever, but I was thinking Gypsy Kings doing Hotel California, which he didn't write, right?
He didn't write.
Don Field or something. So no, I don't think Jeff and I are saying a different thing. And look, I ran a label. There are really, really good labels out there. There really are. Merge, obviously, with the success of Arcade Fire. I mean, there's some labels out there. I think the question that you'll ask yourself at a certain point is what's the trade-off and what's the benefit? I've talked way too much. Go ahead, Peter. You said something smart.
You're saying all the right things. I completely agree. I think, with my philosophy, with the artists I work with, it was always about, well, what's the deal? And if the deal is a good deal, then we do it. And if it isn't, we pass and we work and we support our families and we do what we have to do until the deal gets better. And sooner or later, the deal gets better, and you do it under your own terms. And the Gypsy Kings are a really good example. They're kind of, people don't really understand them. They don't speak English. They live in the south of France. No one knows that they're French, but they are.
Way smarter than all of us.
Really, in that way of life. And they just go out. They've played in America for the last 25 years, every year, religiously. They've never missed a year. They've done 2 tours, sometimes 3 tours a year in America, and they tour around the world. But they tour, and they make their money from that. They go back to their settlements. They pay off who they have to pay off.
Right.
And they come out when they need more money, and they go out and do it. And then someplace along the line, people they keep coming. They keep coming and buying tickets, and they're able to look and say, okay, it's time to record a record. And we'll record a record, and then we'll say, well, let's see who wants to do it and what can they do. Sooner or later, if not, we put it out ourselves. Sooner or later, someone comes along with a good deal, and they're like, okay, let's
That's
do it.
great. That's a working musician.
Those are options.
Yeah, I'd like to see musician be a job again instead of
That's what I'm trying to say.
failure or rich asshole.
But based on somebody else's definition of what failure and success is.
Exactly.
That's the whole problem, is that these major labels have sort of calibrated our expectations around their definition of failure and success. And that's one of the things Jeff always talks about. It's like, he wrote a piece recently about gold records, platinum records, or whatever, and their completely arbitrary nature of those things. And that's the sort of definition of success. Whereas, your artist, what you're doing, to me, that's success. I mean, that's success because it gives you options. The Gypsy Kings are living in the fucking south of France, right? And playing when they want to play and making their art on their terms.
Well, they're from there, though.
But they've chosen not to leave and chosen not to move to godforsaken L.A. so that maybe they'll bump into Irving fucking Aiges, right?
But it is true that if
Settle down over there.
You invited me, man. I mean, I got other things I could be doing.
Well, I didn't
if
mean to
you
get you
do-
riled up. I'm sorry.
If you do extricate yourself from the traditional music industry, then you no longer have to buy into the idea that success is playing bad music and failure is playing good. We can reverse that scenario. I don't know if the internet is the only thing that facilitates that, but it would be a lovely outcome.
Should we open up to questions? I always feel like I mean, are we talking about stuff anyone wants to hear?
I don't know. That's a really good question. Yes? Oh, good. This is good for you? Okay, great. Well, I have one more question, but then I would like to open it up for questions because we're only going to be here for about another 15 minutes or so because we all got to go to Jazz Fest. I came across some interesting statistics not too long ago as far as artists being able to, let's define success as being able to support a family. Just basically be able to survive and live to the manner in which you choose to become accustomed.
And create the music on your own terms.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Without
Okay.
being commercial jingles.
To be able to, have a family and support yourself through your chosen craft. The poverty level in the United States, the minimum, or not the poverty level, but if you were a minimum wage worker, and you earn nothing but the minimum wage, you earn about $1,160 a month. In order to make that much money, just to basically make the minimum wage, selling your music online, if you sell a self-produced album on CD Baby that you release yourself, you need to sell 155 albums a month in order to earn the minimum wage. If you sell it via retail channels, you need to sell 1,100 records, and if you wanted to sell it via iTunes, you'd need to sell 1,200 in order to
How many would
earn.
you need to sell via streams on Pandora?
Right, and then obviously if you're
No, but it would be like 12 million. I'm
Yeah.
not kidding.
well,
I know.
it says on a Rhapsody stream is 849,000.
Okay.
Wow.
So you sell your own record on CD Baby, you sell 155 a month, and you earn the minimum wage. To earn the same amount of money, you would have to have 849,000 streams.
Maybe we should all go to medical school.
Or law school, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, George already did that.
Oh, you're the man.
So it seems that just selling your music, whether it's online or through other channels, is not necessarily enough to be able to earn a livelihood. So
And add to that the fact that people don't buy records anymore.
because they think the music should be free, or it's accessible free, even if they would choose to pay for it. I mean, I believe in copyrights, I believe in supporting musicians, but I listen to a lot of music on YouTube, and Lord knows what the rights issues are there. So all of us are happy to take advantage of free music when it's out there. It's going to be increasingly tough, though, to sustain a career as a person who can support a family. You got to do other stuff. Can we just talk very briefly about this whole notion that George referred to earlier of licensing? Is licensing music to film? We have a panel on this next Friday about licensing music to film and television and video games. Everybody has jumped in and said, well, we can't sell records anymore, so getting your music used in a commercial or a video game or in a movie, that'll be our savior. That is what's going to help us generate revenue in the new day. Any validity from
So there are
yours?
just as many people that say we should never do that.
Okay. Because it's selling out, it's too
Yeah.
commercial?
Well, increasingly few.
I know, but
Increasingly.
Well, there was a funny Stephen Colbert bit right before the Grammys where he had the Black Keys and Vampire Weekend having a battle of the bands to see who had sold out the most by getting their music into more commercials. They were, Honda versus Hewlett Packard and Victoria's Secret versus McDonald's and whatever. So
Well, look, I mean, it's sort of that's sort of the holy grail that everybody's looking out for. I've got friends in a band called the Civil Wars that are doing it on their own. They've sold just an ungodly amount of records on their own, no label, through iTunes. If you trace back the sort of the projection, the trajectory of how that happened, it was because they got a sync, and I forget what show it was, some show, and then in that you hear about that occasionally. I'm gonna refrain from sort of giving an opinion about that. I will say it's a buyer's market for music supervisors, but I would say that all of you that are sort of pinning your hopes on that, be careful, because those types of opportunities again tend to come out of when you've generated some other buzz. They don't come out of, hey, I've written some great song, I'm going to send it to music supervisor XYZ, they're going to stick it in a show. It tends to happen, well, I've been playing, been doing my thing, I've toured out in LA, I've gotten my record played on KCRW several times, and then some music supervisor. There's definitely magic in motion. So whether or not we're at some bubble of music supervision or whatever, who the hell knows? But I will tell you, it's not a unified thing that just happens without a whole lot of other things happening. And again, I go back to what I started with, playing live, getting out there, building up real connections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a little bit of everything. You can't expect to, if you wanted to license your songs to television, you can expect that to happen every year. You certainly not 20 years it takes to raise a family or to just live. So it's a question of doing everything you can and bringing all those things together, and that's how you make a living in this business. People do it and have been doing it all along. So it's doable, but it's little bits and pieces. You bring it along. A licensing here, you go out and play there. As long as you keep your music, you keep your brand or whatever you want to call it, as long as you keep it genuine and right, and you have those fans that you're talking about, Kristen, that really care what you do and know what you do and appreciate good music, they'll support you. They'll pay a little bit more. They'll always be there for you. They'll always buy another CD. They'll always turn somebody else onto it. They'll do everything. You know,
Yeah.
you cultivate
They
that.
last longer.
They do.
I was asked to guest star on Friends when it was the #1 show on TV. I was supposed to play Jeremiah was a bullfrog in their cafe, and I said no.
As any reasonable person would have. Yeah.
And Warner Brothers called and said, "You don't say no to the #1 show on TV." It's like, yeah, I do. People would hate me if I did that. And then my band, Throwing Muses, actually ended because we ran out of money. We could no longer afford to be in the studio or on the road, and it was absolutely heartbreaking for me. I can't tell you. My religion was over that day. And Mountain Dew called us, offered us a Super Bowl commercial if we'd stand on a mountain and play Thank Heaven for Little Girls. And I still wonder if not doing that is okay, because maybe my band would have been alive, and that would have been a happy ending on its own, but I couldn't make myself do that for Mountain Dew. It's not music.
Anybody you would do it for?
Well, that's a good question. And like Peter was saying, I didn't write Thank Heaven for Little Girls, and I'm not really into it. So it wouldn't have been my integrity answer. My integrity answer was another big fat no. But it's possible that they could, I could license something to somebody that wasn't evil, and it would be good music instead of bad.
Well, and I'm sure on your panel it'll come up, but in both of those horrible sort of Faustian bargains, both Jeremiah was a bullfrog and Thank Heaven for Little Girls, your income would not have been that great because you didn't
write the song. I know,
as best I
yeah.
know, you didn't write either of those songs.
Yeah, I did a Cat Stevens cover they put on NPR, and I didn't make a penny.
You'd make a dime. So you got to
Yeah.
be really careful, and I'm sure you'll cover this in your topic, but most of those quote-unquote opportunities, there may be some small upfront fee, but if you didn't write the song, you're not going to get any of the revenue from public performance royalties or anything like that. So,
Yeah.
oftentimes they'll make them work for hires that so you were not only trading all of your integrity, but you're really not getting much. And that happened with Clem Snide with Ed.
Yeah.
I also think they thought I was Chrissy Hind.
That's
She was
an
on
approach.
Friends a couple months later. Yeah.
It all depends, though. I mean, Dr. John didn't write the song, the Untitled, the beginning song for The Princess and the Frog.
Right.
But he performed it, and he did really well with it, and he liked doing it. Randy Newman, wrote the song. He knows Randy. He had such a wonderful experience. Disney was, very nice. They were really genuine people.
But he's
when
Dr. John.
So it depends on who you are. It depends really.
He's Dr. John.
So let's just further define success. We're assuming that being able to support one family without
And maintain your integrity. Yeah.
but I'm assuming that we're also talking about without resorting to the dreaded day job, correct?
Well, I think
No,
that's
why?
valid. I think
Okay,
that's
well,
that's a hero, is to have the day job and play the passion. I like to think that the idea that people want to be rich rock stars is just over, and we weed out the ego-ridden greedy that way.
I'm sorry, you wanted to ask a question. Why don't you go ahead?
People, but what I want to say is I'm really impressed by the commentary today. think it's coming from a valid place. And one thing I communicate with all artists is, what is your work? What are you trying to do? What are you really trying to accomplish? And what is it worth for you to sell millions of albums? What is really going on? And I think it's a question that not only musicians are asking themselves, but all people. How are we going to survive? How are we going to maintain our families? How are we going to maintain our communities and this infrastructure? And I think we should be intentional about what we do with our economics once we, make the profits and stuff like that. Because we're going to the same suppliers to buy food, water, energy, all those kind of things. We have to reinvent, and we have to continue to build institutions that have created musicians and created the empires that we now know. We have to continue to expand, continue to build bridges, and continue to build community. I don't think it's good for any of us, musician or otherwise, to just settle for what we have right now. We use our art, we use our words, we use our thoughts to manifest a better world for ourselves and for the sake of all humanity. And I think that's what I've been getting from this panel, but just from a musician standpoint.
Absolutely. You should be up here.
Yeah, but if you don't find a way to monetize it at some level, eventually all of those very beautiful things that you said will be forsaken by something that does get you to put money, put food on your table. It's a balance.
But that's why a day job's so valid.
Well, that's what I say. I mean, there's a great blogger named Hugh McLeod, and he talks about the sexy job and the money job. And,
Right.
I mean, how many of us really have one job? At what point? I mean, that's crazy.
And if you
I
add
can't
art
count up how
in?
many fucking jobs I have. So, I mean, if yes, make your art, and it can be a distraction to have those other jobs, but we should all be so lucky. I mean, name me authors, name me filmmakers, name me poets that get to just, I'm just going to be a poet. Best of luck with it. Mr. Frost.
Yeah, it's good money in that.
Yeah, that was my day job, to become a writer.
Yeah. How'd that
What
go?
a winner.
Well, and how many musicians throughout history have taught,
Right.
and worked at the post office even?
Dr. John is
Yeah.
writing, singing for a frog, in addition to making an amazing record or whatever. And in
If
addition
you
to
become
making
your own
records.
sponsor, then
What? Yeah, I mean, that's 2 jobs.
Well, even Dr. John has other jobs. I mean, there's not a week that doesn't go by when I'm out on the road with him and somebody doesn't come up and say, oh, I love those old videos you did to teach me how to play piano. Yeah. And it was like, Mac is wonderful. He'll
I've never seen those.
Oh, yeah, and Homespun Records is a guy in Woodstock named Happy Trom. He did it. And then he did a second generation of it, and we had Hal Wilner come in and do like instigate them along, and they had like these cameras, and everybody loved these things, and they're fabulous. They're really great, and he's teaching people how to play piano because he needed bread at some time.
Look,
That's
be
a good idea.
entrepreneurial. That's what I've been trying to say as inarticulately as possible. Is be entrepreneurial, and your music is one of your tools in your little toolbox.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What do you guys think about vinyl records and the kind of revival of the record collector? And I have another question. As far as you were talking about how most musicians are kind of dorky and just want to focus on their music, how much time do you feel that you should devote to like self-promotion and things like that?
These are good questions. I'm all about the vinyl. I think it's the listener's dollar vote. 50 Foot Wave puts out only vinyl and gives away downloads. We don't do CDs. I did my last record as a book and vinyl because I think it's a way to say that you care about music and not plastic or not the traditional recording industry. But I'm not at odds with George when it comes to being entrepreneurial. I have to wear a different hat when I approach marketing. It's not necessarily a dirty word. All it means is that you don't believe music is finished until it's been adopted as someone else's soundtrack. And we have to figure out the best ways to find the people that I really do believe could be saved by music. I mean, that's how big a dork I am. I think music can save you. And there have been a few generations who have been separated from their own soundtracks by an industry that only allows us to eat Fritos instead of apples. Because apples are free. They grow on trees like real music.
So vinyl's important because it goes back to my point earlier on. Vinyl's an offline experience. Vinyl is not ones and zeros that are zapped around. It's what you call a social object. It's something you pick up and you share. Hey, I got this thing. You should look at it. Maybe you can borrow it. You touch it, you feel it, you hold it. It is an offline experience. It arguably, and I agree, it does sound better than CDs too. That's not why vinyl resurgence has become. The vinyl resurgence has become what it is, not because of audio fidelity, but because people want tactile things that they can share offline. And the more things you can do with your music, with that, be it vinyl or books or what have you, the better off you will be. The more you resort to, okay, we will sell 128K MP3s or streams or what have you off your site, the more you will be like everyone else and you will lack connection. That's why vinyl works.
I have artists that sell more vinyl than CDs. So, if you could put it on a rock and throw it through a window and someone would support it, I'm for it. I mean, any way you can get the message through, you can get your music to people, it's the way to do it, and vinyl's a great way to do it for all the reasons they said.
Question.
I have more of a comment. As the mother of a musician who is on TuneCore, who created his first song at age 16 when he discovered he could share his music, and it sold, ironically, in Sweden of all places. It went off the charts there. What you have done is...
Did he move there?
No, not yet.
He lives
Why
in the south
not?
of France.
I would move there immediately. Mom, I'm going to Sweden.
He didn't think of it. But what you have done, in addition to putting that revenue in the musicians' pockets as opposed to the labels' pockets, is you have created a venue that inspires musicians to create more because they see that they can make money from selling their music, from sharing their work, from sharing their passion. But I also can't help but wonder how many great artists we have missed out on even meeting or learning about because they never had this opportunity in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s.
Bobby
there are
Charles
many
just
people
died,
who,
you know?
well, there are many people who never had the opportunity because they weren't heard. So I applaud you for the vision for giving musicians this opportunity.
That's awful nice of you to say. Thank you so much.
You want to go? All right.
Do it together.
My turn. How are you?
Stereo.
All right. Listening to the panel, I had a little confusion in my question. First of all, Kristen, I admire your integrity, but I would have been on top of that mountain in a New York minute. Sorry. And
You're
Scott,
a
you
little
broke
snazzier
my.
than me.
Yeah, but look at your hat
I
and
know.
everything.
I'm not a hat
You
girl.
got- I
I
can
love
see you
my
doing
hats.
that.
It's
Yeah.
showbiz. Showbiz, you got to have the look. But
Guess
anyway,
so.
and Scott, you broke my heart because when I recently released my first CD and was very excited, I sold 27 on CD Baby, and I thought I had arrived, and now you're telling me 1,100.
130 more,
Yeah.
and you'll be fine.
Oh,
you
yeah,
gotta
right.
celebrate
Good
your
luck.
victories.
But
Don't-
hey, only 6 was family, so I was floating. But you broke my heart. You broke my heart. But from what you're saying, there's going to be big change for many reasons, and I agree with what you're saying. But are you primarily saying that Peter's going to be out of a job, there's going to be no more booking agents, it's just going to be, we're going to be having music as a hobby in the future, as a day job with being just a hobby? It's kind of heading that way. There's not going to be a real industry.
Isn't that what it already is for most
Sure,
people?
yeah. But I think that's okay.
Yeah, but
I
we're
mean,
still thinking, yes, it's a hobby today, but if we keep working and we really dedicate, someday it will be where we can, if we're good, be
I
a
don't know if we should
full-time.
even be planning for either. I think we should be so high on playing this afternoon that you can't help it. The song
Oh, I
has
agree,
to be
and I
played.
think that will always happen. I agree with you. That will always happen. I mean, I want to.
That's
That's what I want to
great.
do. But
And then if
will
that
it-
becomes
will
something
Peter be
else-
out of a job?
Uh,
You know, for
I don't
instance,
really
he's a
know
manager.
Peter, but he
You
seems
manage-
nice.
I'm using Peter because you manage artists, and if what you're saying it's all going to change so drastically, then there'll be nobody to help us
Well, I
book.
think
There'll
there
be
have
nobody
always
to help
been-
us with records. There'll be nobody around to help because you guys won't be able to work. You know, you'll be out of work too. And that was my
Yeah.
question. Do you think that's eventually how we're going to wind up?
Well, I think if Peter's good at what he does, then he'll be there doing it. And if he's not, he won't be. He'll be pumping gas, which my.
We could
parents
just go
always-
back in time 100 years or so. There were musicians then, too.
Yeah.
They just didn't do Mountain Dew commercials.
And
Or 500 years when musicians were court composers and they had benefactors like Medici
That's true.
and things like
It's not dissimilar.
everybody was talking about how good the old days were with like the 70s, but there were so many musicians that could make money in those days.
Right.
Record companies were the same as they always have been. You had to find different ways to make it work in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s. I mean,
So the
nothing's really
difference-
changed.
Well, the thing that's changed is that now that it's far easier for somebody like you and your hat to get music into the marketplace and for it to be judged and evaluated and for you to have more control over your destiny. The problem, of course, is that everybody has that opportunity now. There aren't, the barriers of entry have come down, so the tide rolls right in. So you've got to find ways to distinguish yourself. But you know what? I would always, always, always take that alternative than the alternative that predated it, which was I will make a demo, I will send it to someone, and a cousin of a cousin will get it in front of, Tommy Mottola or whatever, and he will give me a chance because I look like Mariah Carey and sing like Mariah Carey. That is very different. I don't know if you're going to succeed. I bet Peter will have a job in the limited duration that I've spent with him. There will always need to be support staffs, but you can, there's a choice. You can say, okay, I'm going to create my work and then hope somebody else, the hand of God comes down and anoints me as one of the chosen ones, which is what it was sort of up until sort of social networking, candidly, and the internet. Or you can say, no, I'm going to make music, I'm going to try to connect, I'm going to try and build a business around it. And of those two alternatives, this is a far better one.
Yeah, because in the 60s and 70s, they weren't so interested in marketing to the lowest common denominator. And Peter's world is outside of that. His artists are quality artists.
Yeah, okay.
Awesome. Okay, we got time for 2 more questions, and then we got to go.
So I have a question, I guess, for focusing on young artists and even young managers, especially here in New Orleans. There's a lot of them that are starting to kind of run the industry here a little bit, and there's a lot of talent. And I think a lot of us know a lot of the things that you've said. That the record label is not where you need to be.
Well,
And
maybe it is for some
maybe.
people. If you need big time radio, the record label is where you need to be.
Right.
You better think long and hard about whether you really need big time radio.
Right.
But go
And
ahead.
I think a lot of people, young musicians, are ambitious and musicians at the same time, and want to do it themselves. But I think there's a struggle with where do you find that capital to get your project going? I think.
I found my capital to start my label. I was in graduate school and I cleaned toilets for 8 months and saved $1,000 in a little shoebox. I took that $1,000, I pressed up 1,000 7-inch singles and sold them for $2.50. I sold all 1,000 of them. I had $1,500 and repeated that stage.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. You do it like any entrepreneur, any bootstrapper that's ever been out there. But what you don't do is wait around and hope somebody's going to write you a big fat check.
Right.
In the meantime, you can always be ambitious as regards your music rather than the music business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or you can start a Kickstarter account and hope that everybody will give you money.
maybe. I mean, it's a good mechanism. Like, everybody's doing that.
Yeah, and that works. And I guess my question is, what are some good, for as a musician that does have a day job, does have a working band that does well? That I think a lot of young bands, they get to a certain point, they are doing well. A lot of the money that they spend doing records is recouped by the money they perform. But at some point, something's got to give, and they have to start making money in one or the other. And I guess what streams, interesting revenue streams, young musicians or even managers can help. What are some of the ones maybe to focus on? And instead of, you have this huge range of merchandise, you have connecting with your fans. What's the best way to connect with your fans to get one of those revenue streams going, I guess?
Boy, that's
Maybe
tough.
that's a really tough question, and maybe it's a more question
I have
for Kristen.
60,000 Twitter followers, and I don't sell 60,000 records any longer.
And how have you found, I guess, because there is this idea that you can have, people are after the likes, they're after the followers, but you want the likes and the followers that are actually going to pay attention to your music.
Exactly.
Who have you, I guess, when do you get that sense that those are the people? How do you find those people?
I honestly don't know what I would do in your position. I have a long history, and I've been building a fan base all those years, even with the help of Warner Brothers Records. And I have retained fans that were initially fooled by lousy radio, but I've also retained some actual listeners who care about quality output. I don't know what I would do in your position starting cold. But if you can play live, that's half the battle. It's hard to play
Well, yeah,
live. It's hard to get shows.
Yeah, I shouldn't say that's starting cold. Actually, I think it's been relatively easy for us to find shows.
That's
I
great.
think our what we're trying to do, and I'm speaking also for a lot of other people, but is okay. You've got all these fans available to you. Sometimes you get really lucky. You play at a festival. There's 500 people in front of you. How do you capture those fans?
Have a mailing list sheet. Try to get everybody to put their email address on your mailing list. Always sell product. Always have records and CDs. And when you sign them, you get their email address. And you could develop a fan base of people who actually care about what you do.
You know what the hot new marketing tool is I just heard about? I read about this online. It's not emails. It's handwritten notes.
Yeah, well, because it's a social object. It's
Read
something
about that online.
Yeah.
But
I miss those.
you know Tom's Shoes, right? The social entrepreneurship company where you buy one pair of shoes, they give one to some person that doesn't have shoes. Why not do social entrepreneurship for music? The cost of goods on burning some CD is nothing, right?
Yeah.
So why not, when somebody buys one of your CDs and gives you an email, give them a second CD for them to give one of their friends that might. I mean, you've got to. Peter said it. It's you've got to cultivate evangelists. You got to. If you are the only one converting fans, you will hit a plateau very fast. It has to move from your constituents converting their friends to become your fans. And if that doesn't happen, either you're playing in the wrong places or your music sucks.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. It's from what Kristen said. It sounds like a lot of, I think, us are on the right track. I know a lot of people are doing email lists and doing things like Top Shoes. So.
If you can give CDs away, that's
Yeah.
great because you just want people to know who you are.
I think a lot of people are just scared to do that. You know, it's putting a lot of money and giving a lot of things away for free.
Absolutely.
And you wonder if it's a, is it a
Make
waste?
it
We're all in
transactional.
there,
Don't make sure at the bare minimum get a handwritten note or an email or something, a QR code, whatever. Make it transactional. Don't just give
Because
away.
you're building something.
You're building something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And our last question.
It actually changed. I was going to ask you about microlending in music and
About what?
About microlending in music and the Threadhead Records, thing and all that type of thing. But given what he was just asking, I decided to change my question to: if you were building a website today like MySpace, how would you build? What would you include in it today? In order to connect to continue to connect the fans with musicians.
How would you build a website?
What would you build?
Well,
what would be in it?
It depends on who you are as an artist and what you value and what you mean.
All Flash. No,
Jingle Bell Jesus.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think what's missed on websites is that it's really not about anything more than you want it to be a place where there's sort of an architecture of participation, but in order for it to be an architecture of participation, you've got to have participants. So again, you've got to have enough people coming to your website so that something can happen, or else it's an online brochure, which doesn't work for anybody. But going back to the other dude's sort of points, I mean, if you're going to collect all these emails, you should be then doing weekly email blasts out, talking hopefully about where you're playing, right? But also what's happening on that website, whether that's a live chat, whether that's, a new song, whether that's one of Billy's lines, a view through the keyhole into a studio process. You've got to make it engaging. So the architecture of the website, I mean, I would do it in HTML5 so that it could be, seen on a phone and an iPad. And sadly, it's going to have to be sort of video heavy, and you're going to have to be able to embed a Ustream thing. But all of those are just tools, and then the real creativity comes in, and it's what makes this era fun, is that you can now start coming up with things that you think would compel somebody to actually type your URL into their browser. Because there's an awful lot of choices on the internet. So why, what's going to be happening on your site that's going to make me go there instead of porn?
You could
Right?
put porn up.
Or you could just do porn.
I try to keep mine really active.
It's where the
I
money
have
is.
essays. I have a daily photo blog. I have free songs that I put up. I have, like George said, video footage in the studio.
It was actually more
I mean, bear that in mind. You're competing against porn.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm
Everybody's
not
competing
talking
against
about
porn.
the. I mean, as in, I mean, I mean, MySpace was supposed to be that thing to begin
No,
with,
MySpace
right?
is not. MySpace
I
is
know
a,
it's not.
a-
I know
a
it's not.
vacuum.
That's my
MySpace
point.
failed because it didn't make the
Now
online.
you got it going.
It didn't make the online-offline connection, right?
Right.
Facebook did. Facebook is essentially a photo sharing site. That's all Facebook is. I took a picture of my offline activity and I stuck it up so that my friends could look at me and what I looked like in high school. They took the offline experience and stuck it online. MySpace fucked that up, and now it doesn't exist. They just shut Friendster down last week, too.
Right. You're beginning to answer the question that I was trying to ask.
Excellent.
Is why did MySpace fail? And if I were building MySpace today, what would you build?
Skype.
No, you
Put
just
Skype
chat
on it. Put Skype in your page so you can have video chats right there. Here, I'm going to play a song for you right now,
Yeah.
and you can talk to me.
Like Facebook Live.
Shit, I'll write that down.
No, it's chat roulette. I mean,
Hey, it is a good idea.
All right, well, I can go home now. Actually, we do have to go. Like the line says, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here because the museum is getting ready to close. But first, please thank our incredible panel, Peter Himberger, George Howard, and the fabulous Kristin Hersh. Thank you all. We'll see you at Jazz Fest, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning.